Hello everybody, this is David Collins from Ann Arbor Guitars. It's been a few years since we did our last video, but I wanted to put out a quick one on a fret crowning technique that we're using. We're not going to go through our entire fret leveling process. That gets a little bit more detailed than I think we're going to be able to fit into a quick 15 or 20 minute video. Hopefully we can keep it that short. But today we're just going to focus on the fret crowning process specifically and some of the tools that we use. And I'd say realistically we're looking at wear down 8-10 thousandths perhaps into the frets. So in the process of leveling these are going to be quite flat on top. So we're going to start by leveling the board. Not going to get into too many details on how we do that at this point. But skip ahead and jump into the crowning process in just a minute. And in our leveling process, we use a series of beams with different grits, anything rated from a coarse, as rough as an 80 grit, usually a 120. For coarse material removal, we want to get this down in the ballpark. We don't want to be using an ultra fine precision lapping film for removing the first 90%. We want to get it in the ballpark first, and then re-equalize all the surfaces, crown them back out, and then we'll come back in and do an actual true final precision leveling on there. Okay, so we have the board leveled down to probably 90% or so of where we want it to be. And see if I can get this without a glare. You can see there's a few spots here that we still have not fully hit the lowest wear point, right there on the 2nd fret, 3rd fret. So we are what I would say 90-95% down to level where we want to be. And we get through that with a fairly coarse grit in leveling. I think I was using somewhere in the range of about a 180 grit on our leveling beams. So now that we have the frets 90-95% leveled, we have to come back and crown. And there's a number of ways of doing that. Traditionally, the way I did this for the first at least 10 years in the trade was the traditional 3-corner file, where we mask off the board. These files have safed edges, and we come back in with a stroke that rolls over the edge of the fret from each side and comes back in and rounds that flat back off to a nice crown. The problem with that is if you do this as a career, if you do this full time, you're just asking for repetitive strain injury. Any luthier who's been doing it long enough knows the problems in the forearm. So maybe 20-30 years ago, Stu Mack started releasing their diamond fret files, which saved a lot of strain in the arm just by allowing us to come in with a pre-shaped file that come in a few different radius and come in and crown this way, so that we're not having to do this heavy stress from side to side. And it certainly helped, but it still can be laborious, especially on instruments where you really have to take off the crown of the frets and you're really leveling them down, especially like Fenders, where we always have to deal with the ski ramp coming up at the end, where we can be recrowning frets from almost totally flat. So I decided to modify a few of these Stu Mack files for an oscillating saw, for a reciprocating saw. This little Bosch saw is the lightest weight one that I could find. Very ergonomic, lightweight, very low powered, which makes it not really the best saw for using for a Sawzall, but it's actually wonderful for doing for something like this. So the tools that are traditionally used for these are, of course, saw blades for Sawzalls. And they simply slip the tang into the receiver of the Sawzall, and there you have it. There's your reciprocating saw. For these files, what I initially did was take a couple of my older Stu Mack files and cut off the end of the tang and reshaped the end of the file to match the shape of a traditional Sawzall. The dimensions here are a 1/2 inch by 900 thousandths from end to the end of the cut for the tang. and about 65 thousandths thick seems to fit well into this particular saw. These were a few old files, heavily worn, that I initially tried it out with, and eventually just ordered a whole new set of the StewMac files to dedicate to this. And so these are their 4 standard 150 grit and 300 grit, 4 crown shapes each. And I just simply ground these down on a bench grinder. If you have a milling machine or a surface grinder, obviously this would be quick work, but we simply cut the tang off right here at the edge of the hole, left it as long as possible, and then shape this down to fit into the receiver of the Bosch reciprocating saw. You don't actually need in the Sawzall tangs, you always have this little extended tang down here on one side. That's kind of an outdated shape. That's something from the very early Milwaukee Sawzalls that is no longer needed. For modern ones, and especially this Bosch, you can use just the full width all the way out to the end. I also, when I started working on this, had ordered, just to check, a couple of these cheap files. I think they go by the Baroque name. Come from China. You can order them through AliExpress or Amazon. And they're so cheap. They're about, $20, $25 a piece, as opposed to each of these being about $170. And I figured at that cost, if they do well enough to last through a dozen fret dresses, that we could use these as a disposable. It's the cost of sandpaper at that point. Problem is, they are absolute crap. I don't know what kind of bond they're using. There's different ways that diamond plating can be bonded to files. There's sintered, there's electroplated, there's resin bonds. Whatever they're doing, I could barely get through 1 or 2 fret dresses for these before the grit was rendered pretty much worthless. So if you are doing this professionally, these files are a non-starter. Just stick with the professional quality StewMac files. In the early concept phase of this, I did actually take one of these Baroque files and modify it to another tang that I bought, which ironically the only place I could find these tangs, a good quality reciprocating saw tang, was through a company called Shagzall, which makes basically dildo adapters of all different shapes and sizes for a reciprocating saw. One of those things I would not have figured you would use a Sawzall for, but maybe I'm not creative enough. At this point, I consider it basically useless because the files that I made it for have no durability to their grit at all. A lot of people have reservation. They see this idea as a little bit crazy. And quite frankly, so did I when I first started with it. It was simply an idea. We'll try it. We'll see if it works. And if it does, great. If not, it was a good laugh. Once I started using it, it was absolutely amazing. When you are, especially if you're doing a lot of fret dresses, aside from long-term repetitive strain injury problems you're going to have with your arms from repetitive motions, there's fatigue in the course of doing the work. And if you're coming in and leveling, 24 frets by hand this way, by the time you get to the end, your arm is going to be fatigued. We have all this motion from the shoulder, from the elbow, from the arm, and when you get up to the end after you've been leveling frets for 20, 30 minutes on a really heavy flat crown like this, you are going to start to get sloppy. You're going to start to wander a little bit this way. Your angle might not be as perfect. And in the worst case scenario, when you get really tired with it, people can start doing really long strokes trying to get through. And there's a huge risk, I've seen it way too many times, of getting a little bit tired, a little fatigued, and with these long strokes, getting to where you pull off and drop off the edge of the board and then come back in and hit the neck. The beauty of this is once I start on the fret, I no longer have any motion of my body. The file stays in one position and I can focus simply on the pressure that I'm putting down on the fret and the angle that I'm hitting across the radius of the board. Now this is a 150 grit. This is a very coarse removal grit that we're using just to get the grunt work out of the way so that we can then come back and do a second pass where we get much more of a true level in here. So here goes. So in spite of seeming like something, you know, the initial reaction is completely understandable. People see you putting fret files into a Sawzall, a demolition product, and it begins with a bit of a gasp. But once you start to see it in action, you can see that it eliminates all sorts of areas for error in body movement, in movement of your torso, your shoulder, your elbow. It lessens fatigue, and it actually allows me to control the file more precisely than I often can by hand. I can control the angle quite precisely, and I can also control the pressure. I can be very light, very heavy, however I want to go with that. But this controls all of the motion in one axis, which frees up my attention to focus on the other areas that can be more important. So now with the initial course leveling out of the way, we have all of the frets at 90-95% even. There's one or two spots we hadn't gotten to. But now when we come in and try and do a more precision final leveling, we are hitting on equal surface area on each fret. You're not hitting on a 20 thousandths wide surface on one fret while only pushing on 5 thousandths wide on another. So we've got that equalized. It helps with any deflection, as minor as it may be, to be leveling everything on even terms, so to speak. So we're going to remark the frets and go back in with a finer grit on our lapping beams. And as it is right now, the lines, I wish I had a macro lens handy to really get a shot of this, but the lines on the frets, the center peaks, are just such clean straight lines with this tool. It's cleaner than I can typically get at the end of a long day when I get tired of doing it by hand. So now we're going to come back in and try a leveling, and then we'll go back in and do a final crowning and then bring it out to polish and finish it up. And that is just what I want to see. We have 1-2 spots that are just coming in. Everything else stayed quite perfectly level. We've got fall away up at the extension. And I think we have hit our last 2 spots there. So now we're just going to do a few quick sweeps with pressure down at the end, light pressure, to make sure we're still clean on our extension, on our fall away past the 12th fret. And everything is hitting there beautifully. Again, nice clean lines. So now we come back in for one final round and clean it up, and then we'll go off to polish. That's exactly what I want to see. Now, in my leveling process, it's not a hard number of doing one coarse leveling and then one fine precision leveling. There are cases where I may end up going through this guitar 2, 3, even 4 times. If I go through and there's some kind of anomaly, the neck is a little weird, is extremely mobile or flexible, or I encounter an area where I missed a spot or I overcrowned and I hit the top, it only takes minutes for me to come back in, remark everything, and come in with a fine grit, precise leveling beam just to do a quick, super light pass. Oftentimes at that point, it won't even require recrowning. Sometimes that just amounts to a final check of the level without actually affecting the shape of the frets. But I can at times do this in 2 stages. or sometimes it'll take 3 or 4. And surprisingly, breaking it down into multiple stages actually shortens the work in the overall job, because I'm not trying to use my finest, most precise grit to get rid of the grunt work of getting down to that 90% mark. I want to get down to that 90% mark quick, 90% accuracy, and then level everything or crown everything out, and then come back in and do the final true precise leveling later, where I don't have to waste the time with the, removing gross material. And I think we are about done and ready to polish these out and set it up. So if anyone plans on making a tool like this, I will say up front, I have been in conversation with the folks at StewMac about them possibly making some version of this. But for the time being, this probably is not a tool for most do-it-yourselfers. It's really something, the main motive behind it is repetitive strain injury, but also efficiency and increased precision. But it gets fairly expensive. By the time you buy all the different files and the saw, you're looking close to about $1,000 for something like this. So if you are going to make it, though, a few quick little caveats. First thing is some of the early files that I made. I made a mistake which I realized could be extremely dangerous, and that is I cut the tangs a little bit too short. You can see if we're looking at from the widening part of the file, from the tang to the file section to the end, the early ones I made were quite a bit shorter. And what can happen there, which is extremely dangerous, is if you find yourself holding the file like this, you can see that tang can come right in and could just guillotine off into your finger. It would be extremely dangerous. So a longer tang on the later versions is critical for safety. Otherwise, that's a big liability. Now it's not going to come in as far as my finger there. What would be even better is if these files were to be made out of standard half-inch stock instead of widening. The current StewMac files widen out to about 5/8 of an inch out here at the end. I would rather see them simply 1/2 inch all the way through, so there's no edge here reciprocating along with. I would also like to see them maybe a 1/2 inch, 3/4 of an inch longer, so that it can get a better reach up on the extension. Right now, with the length sitting over the extension of the guitar, it can just barely reach the far side. It would be nice to have maybe another 1/2 inch there. The radius of the files, the radius of the cutting surface is pretty good on these. On some of StewMac's older files, we had a lot of issues. You can see how you build up a collection. I've got quite a few of these, some of them more worn than others. But the actual shape of the cutting surface wasn't always the best. The current files, the current round nose files that they're putting out are magnificent for this. They're actually very good. The only thing I might like to see changed is the increments of the wide and the jumbo size. If we are looking at they have two files which each have two sizes. So the first narrow side is about an 80,000th of an inch diameter cutter in here, which is perfect for Martin frets, for old standard Fender frets that still have a decent height to them. The next size is about an 1/8 of an inch, about 125 thousandths. Which is good for most medium frets. And then it jumps up rather drastically up to about 200 thousandths of an inch diameter, and then about 250 for the wide and the jumbo. If these were made in the future for this cutter, I actually would rather see them in a sequence of about 80, 125, then maybe 160 to 180, and 200 to 220. I don't think we really need to go up as wide as 250 thousandths. So choosing which file to use on any particular fret could be broken down into a simple chart. I'm trying to think of the best way to describe it here, but it has more to do with the width of the crown and the remaining height above the board. So let's say you have a brand new fret that is 80 thousandths in width and 40 thousandths in height. In this case, the choice is simple. You use a cutter with a matching radius with an 80 thousandths diameter cut in there. But let's say you were trying to dress frets down to, you had a ton of wear on there, and rather than refretting, the person liked low frets, whatever it may be, and you wanted to dress down the frets, and all this material up here were gone. Now that 80 thousandths bit would not work, because when you have your end radius that you're shooting for in here, say you're down to 25 thousandths, your radius is actually this larger radius. This is the shape of the cutter that you want. And so what we have to do is look at the fret width, which is still 80 thousandths, but then we look at the height, which is now 0.025 thousandths, and realistically we may not be, if we're coming up with a fret like this that is flat at the top and then coming down at the edges, we're not necessarily going to be cutting this radius perfect all the way down to there. We're not going to be cutting right down to the surface of the board. We are going to end this cut somewhere around here. So this 25 thousandths, let's subtract 5 thousandths from that to avoid hitting the wood, and just say we want a 20 thousandths height. So what we have here is the chord of the circle right here, and then the arc height right here. So 80 thousandths is our chord, and our arc height is going to be 20. And if we run that through, let me pull up a computer real quick. So I can pull up a computer and just go to, there's countless sites where you can enter this in, and you don't have to go through this whole formula on your own. So length of the chord is 0.08, and height of the arc is 0.02, and that will give us 0.05, and it doesn't matter the units. We're using inches here, but the units are irrelevant here. 0.05 radius, which means a 0.1 diameter. So for this 80 thousandths wide fret that has been shaved down to 25 thousandths, I would actually want to use the medium file on here, because that one is about 125 thousandths of an inch. If I tried to use the 80, I would never really be able to get that arc smooth. You need to picture the entire circle, which actually would go below into the fretboard, if that makes sense. Now, regarding the tool itself, I mentioned this speed control that I have on here. Without the speed control, it does have a variable speed trigger on here, which means if you pull it just a little bit, it'll move at slow speed and then increase as you pull the trigger down. I wanted to have a top speed lock on there so that you're not accidentally going too fast, so that you can set it. So what I did on this one, if anyone plans to modify it on their own, is kind of quick and crude. Again, this was kind of a proof of concept. I was not making this tool as a product to sell, but just to see if it worked. So I'll show you the change that I made on the inside. There is one small retainer clip right here in the battery compartment that needs to be removed. And the modification I made is quite a garage hack and very crude, but it works. and that is removing this stop that slides back and forth. And I'll try and get some pictures of what it looked like when I first pulled it out. But you can see, I told you it was crude, but I basically cut off a block that was there simply as a stop, that stopped the trigger from being pushed back in. And I replaced it with a wedge that at its longest side stops the trigger at its slowest speed, and at its shortest side lets the trigger go all the way back to full high speed. The problem with this, in hindsight, is this smooth surface allows, when you push down, it slides the bar over to the side and increases. And that's why I had to put in this little thumb screw here just as a stop to set how far it could slide over. If I were making this product, the 3D printing or molding, I might do it with stepped increments rather than this slide. That might alleviate the need for that little thumb screw on the side. So I think that's going to wrap it up for this video. Already took a little longer than I want. Sorry we didn't get into our leveling process or the polishing or any of the other details there, but I just wanted to focus on the tool on this case. This went from something that was a loose idea I thought I would try out, thinking it might be useful for coarse material removal or rough leveling, or it might not be useful at all. It might just be a mess. As I've used it over the past few weeks, though, it's become my go-to, and actually I find I can more easily get more precise lines and focus on lightening the pressure and the position and the angle, controlling the angle as I'm going through on the fret leveling process. So I have spoke with some of the folks at StewMac about this. I don't know what the prospect is of this ever being converted into an actual product. For the people who are going to use it, it really is going to be a professional level tool. If you're only doing an occasional fret dress once in a while on your own instruments, it's going to take a long time to recover the cost on all the files on this and the tool itself. If you're thinking about making one and looking at some of the cheaper import files, don't bother. These things will last, 1 or 2 fret dresses in their toast. The StewMac files will last easily for hundreds. It takes me usually a few years to go through a set of the StewMac Diamond files. As far as what the product is called, well, it's Origins with those other files mounted to the Sawzall dildo adapter. Obviously, the term fret fucker seemed appropriate. I don't know if that would be marketable if anyone decided to actually make this product. We've had suggestions ranging from the Luth Saber to the Hillbilly Plek, but I don't know what you call it, but I just wanted to share this with you. Had a few colleagues who were actually working on similar products at the same time as I was, independent of each other. But this one with this small Bosch 12-volt, lightweight, ergonomic, handheld, reciprocating saw just seems to be the magic combination with these StewMac files, which can be fairly easily modified to have that tang ground onto the end to fit snugly into this saw. So anyway, we are going to try our best to come out with more videos as time allows. I know it's been a long time and we've had a lot of requests to come back to doing videos. If you do enjoy these, please be sure to like and subscribe to our channel, and hopefully we'll be seeing you before too long. Thanks a lot.